Hello and welcome to a video where we're going to be taking a journey back through the mists of time to the 1st of October 2001, where for the first time Nvidia unveiled their titanium branding for their graphics cards. So we can see there are three cards there: GeForce 3 Ti 500, Ti 200 and a GeForce 2 Ti. So what could that possibly mean? That's what we're going to be looking at today. So this incarnation of the Ti branding only lasted for a couple of generations, so lasted through the GeForce 3 and GeForce 4 range, and then they changed their minds again and went on to FX. So the Ti that we know and love now was a kind of resurrection of this, I guess. So this article on Tom's Hardware from back then is quite interesting. It's got a bit of the sort of thinking behind why the titanium thing was arrived at in the first place, because the GPUs had gone through a die shrink and they'd been reduced from 180 nanometers to 150 for these cards, and basically the idea of titanium was that it's a lighter, more durable thing, and that was supposed to represent what they'd just done with their chips. But basically all that really meant, the die shrink made chip production cheaper and wasn't really giving the customer anything in particular. And that's probably one of the most interesting things about having a GeForce 2 in there, and why it's part of the GeForce 3 range, is that the GeForce 2 Ti went through this die shrink as well, so it's not 180 like all of the other GeForce 2 cards. It's got a 150 nanometer GPU on it. But you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to bore you looking at Tom's Hardware for this entire video. We're going to be looking at these. So on the left we've got a WinFast GeForce 2 Ti, and on the right we've got an 8-bit GeForce 3 Ti 200, and we're going to compare them. You'd think the 3 would win, but there's a few sort of quirks in the specs of these cards that made me just wonder if that was going to be the case. So despite the fact that the GeForce 2 Ti did get the same die shrink as the GeForce 3, it's still rocking the old NV15 core, whereas the GeForce 3 is rocking the brand new shiny NV20, so it will be interesting to see how different the performance is. Both cards have an effective memory speed of 400 MHz, though it is a quirk of this particular WinFast card. The GeForce 2 Ti has SG-RAM instead of SD-RAM, but apart from that they have the same amount and the same speed, 64 megabytes, and from what I've read, the SG-RAM doesn't make a huge amount of difference in this case with this card. So the actual core clock of the GeForce 2 Ti is higher. It has a core clock of 250 MHz versus 175 MHz on the GeForce 3 Ti 200. But the transistor count on the GeForce 3 is way higher, with a mighty 57 million transistors versus the feeble 25 million on the GeForce 2 Ti. Yeah, on the back, the 8-bit card just has the model number printed, but WinFast got into the marketing of the shiny metallic new thing, and they were proud to stamp titanium on the back of their card. So as I said, both of these cards have got 64 megs of RAM, though I think the GeForce 3 Ti 200 did come out with a 128 meg version a bit later on. One of the other big differences about these cards is, of course, the GeForce 2 is a DirectX 7 card, and the GeForce 3 is now DirectX 8. And I read somewhere, I'm not sure if this is true or not, I think the GeForce 3 was the first DirectX 8 card. So I got the GeForce 2 Ti off eBay in an old machine that didn't work for £25, I think it was. So I was quite pleased. I sort of spotted this in the picture, and it was really this card that I was aiming for when I got that battered old thing, but it works, so that was cool. And recently I got this. This is the first GeForce 3 I've ever owned, so it was quite nice. I found this on a local listing, and I think this was £20 as well, so that's pretty cool. When they first launched, I think they were $115 for the GeForce 2 Ti and $149 for the GeForce 3 Ti 200, so not that much of a difference in price range. That was the value of them new. So what do they cost now on eBay, since I didn't buy these on eBay, individually at least? I don't really know. So yeah, there is a passive heatsink version of the Ti 200, which seems to be a little bit cheaper, but the prices are really kind of all over the place. Some people asking more than 100, I guess 70, 80 seems to be about the average. There's the Siluro that I've got by the looks of it, 64 meg version, £98 he wants. So yeah, not the most valuable card in the world, but certainly worth more than the £20 I paid for mine. And if we look for sold ones, there aren't many. There was a broken one there that sold for £13, and the other one was on sale for 102, but he accepted an offer, so who knows. Looking at the GeForce 2 Ti, they look a bit cheaper, though there's still some people asking kind of £90. They seem to be around sort of £60 version. There are a few cheap ones in there, when you figure in postage, about 50 maybe. And yeah, you can see that people have been prepared to bargain and make offers are getting them for kind of £20 and £30. So I think the GeForce 3 Ti is probably worth a little bit more than the 2 Ti, but I think it's a nice card nevertheless, and I was glad to get it out of that old rusty machine. Anyway, enough waffle, on with the test. So it's nice to get my old Pentium 4 test rig out. Haven't used this for a while, so yeah, we're going to be using this machine to do our testing in. And within this beast that I use for most of my tests, I recently had to replace the motherboard because the old one died, but basically it's a Pentium 4 system with a 2.6 gig P4 in it. The motherboard's from ECS, it's a P4V MM2. The board has universal AGP. I've seen some documentation that says it's only 1.5 volt, but it seems happy with my Voodoo 3s and such. The chipset's from VIA, and it's a P4M266A chipset. Memory, we've got 1 gig of DDR266 in here. We're going to be running Windows 98, so I had to patch that because Windows 98 doesn't like more than 512 megabytes, but there is a patch that allows you to run it with 1 gig. Not that it makes much difference, I don't think. So yeah, that's the test rig. Okay, so once I had the card in the machine, it was time to install some drivers, and I ran into all sorts of crazy stuff here. So, as I understand it, originally when the first GeForce launched, didn't mention before, but before the Titanium range came out, there was a GeForce 3 launched, and it was just called the GeForce 3. And it has new stuff in the NV20 GPU, the vertex shaders and stuff like that. And the drivers that were around at the time that came out with the card didn't really show that off, and it didn't really show much of a performance boost over the faster GeForce 2s. So the first thing I did was went to Nvidia's website and got the latest version of the driver that supports these two cards, which I think was 81.98, and all sorts of crazy trouble. It's worked okay with some things and it didn't work with other things, and then I took a few steps back and I just kind of went back in small increments. So the earlier drivers, there was a version 77.72, and then I went down to 66.94, thinking I didn't want to go too far back from the most recent version of the driver, but I was getting all sorts of crazy results. So some games just weren't running at all, like the Doom 2 benchmark. I couldn't get that to work. It kept on freezing. I was getting crazy low frame rates in things like Unreal Tournament 99, but it was working fine in 3D Mark. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. So I went on like this for about a week. This video was taking way too long to make and I couldn't figure it out. Eventually, when I was Googling, looking for clues, I came to this thread on Vogons where a guy was talking about a TI-200, which looks suspiciously similar to my 8-bit one with its heat sinks and stuff, even though it isn't, I don't think. But he said that he'd run a load of benches on this thing using different versions of the driver, and yeah, there was a lot of them were unstable, and they were all the most recent ones that I've been trying as well, so that kind of made sense. So in his experiment, version 43.45 was the fastest, so it was way further back than I'd gone. I loaded that driver up and that one was stable, so it's a new one on me, but not all Nvidia drivers seem to work particularly well with particular cards, so at least I got a driver in the end. I did actually find the original 8-bit Siluro driver as well, and that one seemed reasonably stable, but for some reason it didn't have a way to disable VSync in OpenGL, so I just went and used this version 43.45 from the reference drivers, and everything seemed fine. Okay, so on with the test. And to begin with, we're going to use 3D Mark 2000 because it's a DirectX 7 benchmark, and that is the realm of the GeForce 2 Ti. Then we're going to do the same thing again on 3D Mark 2001 because that's a DirectX 8 benchmark, and that is the realm of the GeForce 3. But as well, in 3D Mark 2001, it tests all of the bling that you got on the GeForce 3, so it does all of the vertex shading and the pixel shading and full screen anti-aliasing, which is all stuff that was added in the MV20, so that can really show off the GeForce 3. And of course we have to test on some games as well, so I tried to do it over a spread of stuff to give the GeForce 2 Ti a chance. So we went back to Expendable, which I think is DirectX 6. I might be wrong, but correct me if I am. But that should give the GeForce 2 Ti a chance to shine. Then we're going to do Unreal Tournament 99, so that's a DirectX 7 game, which is again the realm of the GeForce 2 Ti. And then we're going to go into some DirectX 8 games. We're going to do Dungeon Siege. We are going to do Unreal Tournament 2004. So Unreal Tournament 2004's minimum spec for graphics is a GeForce 2, so we'll see how that goes. So the way we're going to do this is by running 3 resolutions of each in 16-bit and 32-bit color, 800 by 600, 1024 by 768, and 1600 by 1200, just to give it a bit of a push. Though I imagine around this time, I don't know, maybe wrong here, but 1024 by 768 was probably the kind of standard gaming resolution, I guess. So as the benchmarks came in, a bit of a shock straight away. It's 16-bit color, 800 by 600. The GeForce 2 Ti got a score of 9010, whereas the GeForce 3 Ti 200 got 8872. So a higher score for the GeForce 2 Ti, who would have guessed? And looking at the games, the inbuilt game benchmarks for the helicopter game at high resolution, the GeForce 2 Ti was getting 78 frames a second, and the GeForce 3 Ti 200 was only getting 75, so a few frames behind. In Adventure, the other game at high resolution again, the GeForce 2 Ti got 55 frames a second, and the GeForce 3 Ti 200 only got 53, so dragging a couple of frames behind the GeForce 2, who would have thought? Up to 1024 by 768, and things closed down a little bit, so still the GeForce 2 Ti tiny little bit ahead in 3D Mark with a score of 8362 and 8360 for the Ti 200, but the game bench frame rates were slightly more, as you would expect. There's 65 frames a second in the helicopter game for the GeForce 2, and the GeForce 3 was ahead of it now at 69.9, and again in Adventure 54.5 for the GeForce 2 and 52.2 for the GeForce 3, so it was kind of ahead in the helicopter game but slightly behind still in the Adventure game. And that weird little pattern repeated itself when we went up to 1600 by 1200. So the GeForce 2 here got 5129 3D Mark, and the Ti 200 again slightly behind, 5057. In the games, again, the Ti 200 was slightly ahead of the GeForce 2. It got 38.4 in the helicopter game as opposed to 32.7 for the GeForce 2, and it was the other way around again in the Adventure game, so the GeForce 2 was faster this time with 53.2 against the GeForce 3's 51.4, so all a little bit strange. So after the exciting quirks in 16-bit, things became a bit more as you'd expect when we got into the 32-bit. So we can see here that the GeForce 3 fairly consistently beats the GeForce 2 at all resolutions, gets higher 3D marks, and a quick scanning of the game benches reveal still some slight quirks there. The GeForce 3 is faster in the helicopter game at 800 by 600 and 32-bit, but still a teeny bit slower than the GeForce 2 in the Adventure game. Not quite sure what's going on there, but as soon as you get into the higher resolutions, then the GeForce 3 starts to pull away. In the helicopter game, it's like almost up to 70 frames a second versus the GeForce 2's 46 in the helicopter game, and a couple of frames faster. They're still pretty close in the Adventure game, so I guess that one doesn't sort of take advantage of the things that the GeForce 3 has to offer. But when you get up to 1600 by 1200, the GeForce 2 becomes unplayable in 32-bit, so you're getting 20 frames a second in the helicopter game, still getting 41 in the adventure game, but the GeForce 3 gets 36 in the helicopter game and 50 in the adventure game. So a bit of a weird one, a bit of a weird bench altogether, I think. And on to 3D Mark 2001, then things kind of become as you'd expect. So you can see just all the scores straight up there that were clearly ahead with the GeForce 3 over the GeForce 2 in all scenarios, all the 3D Marks, and scanning over the game results at high resolution. They are all several frames faster on the GeForce 3, and as you get into higher resolutions, significantly faster. So in some of the lower resolutions, in the car game, for example, it's 800 by 600 at 16-bit. You're still getting 27 frames a second on the GeForce 2, but it's borderline playable at that point. But you're only just getting over 30 frames a second on the TI-200, so you're into the 30s, 33, 34, and that's pretty much the pattern. But as the resolution increases, the gap gets bigger. So for example, at 1600 by 1200 in the car game, you're only getting 20 frames a second on the GeForce 2, but you're getting 30 frames a second on the GeForce 3. Another strange glitch on this is the scores for the 800 by 600 and 1024 by 768 at 16-bit for the GeForce 2 are almost identical. That was because for some bizarre reason it was reporting that the resolution of 800 by 600 wasn't supported by the graphics card on 16-bit. I don't know whether that was another strange graphics driver glitch, but by that point I didn't really care, so I didn't change it. Okay, onwards for some gaming benchmarks. One thing about 3D Mark 2001 is it really did show off the vertex shading and the pixel shading and stuff very nicely on the GeForce 3, and in that little clip of the nature benchmark we just saw there, I have to say it did look very nice. Those tests for nature and the vertex shaders and stuff just didn't run at all with the GeForce 2 Ti because it doesn't support that at all. So on to Expendable now, and again, and it goes to show, I think, that when you get back into your DirectX 6 and DirectX 7 territory, there really doesn't seem to be much between the GeForce 2 Ti and the TI-200. So here we've got, it's even ahead at 800 by 600 in 16-bit, and then it kind of is pretty much neck and neck for the rest of it. It's only when you get into the high resolutions in 32-bit that the GeForce 3 really seems to pull away. So again, it's wasn't really what I was expecting. I was expecting it could be a driver thing. I'm wondering what I said before about the drivers not being mature to show off all the new stuff in the GeForce 3, that I don't know, when I had that driver trouble and I had to go back to an earlier version. I hope it isn't a version that doesn't support all of this stuff, but I don't think so. But yeah, I wasn't expecting the GeForce 2 to be doing this well in some of the games or the other benchmarks. So on to Dungeon Siege, which is a bit of a strange benchmark because Dungeon Siege does have settings for resolution and things like that, and you are supposed to be able to hack the path in the shortcut to run the benchmark to allow for different resolutions and color depth, but that doesn't seem to work, and all of the other information I can find online seems to suggest that it's kind of an intelligent benchmark, and it basically adjusts itself to get the most out of whatever hardware you're running on. So that seems to be the way this runs. Most people who have got submitted benchmarks online that I've found just have a single benchmark, and that's it. So again, this is a weird one because the GeForce 2 beats it. It beats the GeForce 3 again. And this is a DirectX 8 game, so I don't know whether it's because of this sort of scaling shenanigans going on in this benchmark that it's maybe, you know, giving the GeForce 2 more of a chance. But either way, another strange result. Now, both of these cards are using the same driver, so basically as I put each card in, it detects straight away with the same driver, so there's nothing weird going on there. So yeah, unexpected. What can I say? On to Unreal Tournament. So this was the DirectX 7 benchmark game to try and give the GeForce 2 a bit of a chance, but this time not significantly, but the GeForce 3 is slightly ahead in all circumstances, I think. So yeah, kind of what you'd expect. I would have expected a bigger gap, but it is ahead, and I was expecting frame rates well into the hundreds for the GeForce 3, to be honest. I couldn't run it at 1600 by 1200 for some reason. Well, I could run the game perfectly, but for some reason the time demo wouldn't run in that resolution, so I just decided to leave it at the 2. Yeah, but it gives a sort of similar picture. I'm beginning to suspect as we go along that some of these drivers might be older ones, but with this particular model card have all those issues with the later drivers, which doesn't seem unique based on that Vogons thread, so a bit strange. So finally, on to Unreal Tournament 2004. So this was a bit of a weird one for benchmarking. The usual benchmarking tool was missing from Unreal Tournament 2004 when it was released. All the folders and everything were in there, but it was almost like they forgot to put the exe to run it in there as well. So I don't know whether that was patched later at some point, but in the meantime people came up with other tools, one of which I used, a thing called UMark. Now UMark doesn't allow you to set any color depth, so I'm assuming here that everything is running at 32-bit, and yeah, ran it on both cards, and again, I mean, I don't really know what to say. It's pretty much neck and neck on this DirectX 8 game from what, 3 years after these cards came out. You would expect that the GeForce 3 would absolutely annihilate the GeForce 2, but it doesn't. The TI 200 doesn't anyway. I presume the TI 500 would have absolutely blazed away, but I don't know whether this is realistic benchmarking or whether it's got something to do with that weird driver thing that I read about, that the older drivers really didn't show much of a speed difference. I don't know whether it's the SG RAM in the GeForce 2 maybe going much more efficiently and better. I really don't know. I wasn't expecting it to be anything like this close. Clearly at higher resolutions the GeForce 3 does better, but by and large these cards are not too far apart, and yeah, surprising. So that pretty much wraps it up. I'm not sure I learned anything from that, apart from maybe I need to go and experiment with more drivers to try and prove whether or not it is an issue with the drivers. I suspect it is, and if I could find a later driver that was stable with this card, you'd see some bigger differences. But in the meantime, the GeForce 3 was definitely a better card, as we're going to show in this little bit of the 3D Mark 2001 benchmark, the nature section, which shows off all the vertex shaders and the draw distance and all the fancy stuff that came with the MV20. And yeah, that's pretty much it. A curious little experiment, but didn't really reveal much, apart from maybe that I need to check more drivers. So I hope you enjoyed watching it, if you made it this far, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Thank you very much. I'll see you later.